You're standing outside your shelter, and it's minus 40 degrees. Your breath freezes before it even leaves your mouth. There's no lighter in your pocket, no matches, no lighter fluid, nothing to strike a spark with. If you don't figure this out in the next few hours, you die. This wasn't a hypothetical for your ancestors. This was 100,000 winters. Let's start with what we actually know. Around 190,000 years ago, the planet entered one of the harshest cold periods in human history. Temperatures in parts of Europe and Asia dropped low enough to freeze rivers solid for months at a time. Snow didn't melt for half the year, and the humans living through it had no way to strike a spark, no flint tools shaped for fire starting, no matches, nothing. So how did they not freeze to death? The answer starts with something archaeologists found in a cave in South Africa, at a site called Wonderwerk. Layers of ash dating back over 170,000 years, packed so deep that researchers realized this wasn't an occasional fire. This was constant. Humans weren't making fire from scratch every time. They were keeping it alive. That's the first survival strategy. Never let it go out. Groups would take turns, day and night, feeding a coal bed just enough fuel to keep it smouldering without burning through their supply. Lose the fire, and you might not get it back for days, maybe never, not in a blizzard, not with wet wood and frozen hands. So somebody was always watching it, always. Fire wasn't a convenience, it was a member of the group that needed to be fed and protected like anyone else. But fire alone wasn't enough to survive an ice age. Ice age humans needed insulation, and they got it from the animals around them. Mammoth hide, months thick, sewn together using bone needles found at sites in Russia dating back 40,000 years. These weren't crude wraps thrown over the shoulders. They were fitted, layered, wind-resistant. Some researchers believe early humans were making tailored clothing, sleeves, hoods, boots, long before anyone thought to call it fashion. It was the difference between living and freezing solid overnight. A person wrapped in a single loose hide might survive an hour outside in that cold. A person in fitted, layered clothing could hunt in it. Think about what that actually required. Someone had to kill an animal capable of killing them first, then scrape the hide clean without tearing it, then cure it so it wouldn't rot or stiffen into something unusable, then cut it, shape it, and stitch it with a needle carved from bone using thread made from sinew. Every single step could go wrong, and they did this again and again for generations, refining the process until it kept people alive through winters that lasted most of the year. Then there was shelter design. In Ukraine, archaeologists uncovered structures built almost entirely from mammoth bones, over 20,000 years old, at a site called Mezherich. Ribs and tusks arranged into a dome, then covered in hide. Not a cave, not a lean-to. An engineered structure built to trap body heat and block wind in a landscape with almost no trees to burn. Some of these bone structures used the remains of over 60 mammoths. That's not a shelter someone builds in an afternoon. That's a project. Multiple families working together, planning ahead, using materials scavenged over months or years because they knew winter was coming and knew exactly what it would take to survive it. And when the cold got extreme, humans didn't fight it alone. They packed together, literally, sleeping in tight groups, sharing body heat, sharing the watch over the fire, sharing the risk. Isolation meant death. A person alone in an Ice Age winter, no matter how skilled, was working against odds that eventually caught up with them. Groups that stayed close survived nights that would have killed a person alone in hours. This is likely part of why humans evolved to be so deeply social. It wasn't a personality trait, it was a survival mechanism. The people who wanted to be alone didn't pass on their genes as often as the people who needed each other. There's another piece of this that doesn't get talked about enough: food storage. You can't hunt in a blizzard. You can't forage when everything is buried under 3 feet of snow. So Ice Age humans had to think ahead in a way that pure survival, day to day, doesn't require. Evidence from sites across Europe shows early humans digging pits into permafrost, essentially natural freezers, to store meat during short hunting windows, so it would last through the months when hunting was impossible. Kill a mammoth in autumn, and if you can preserve enough of it, you might make it to spring. Fail to preserve it, and autumn's success means nothing by January. This is where a lot of people get the Ice Age wrong. They picture desperate hand-to-mouth survival, people barely making it through each day with no room for anything else. But the archaeological record tells a different story. These groups weren't just surviving, they were engineering solutions to problems that would kill a modern person in hours. Fire management systems, tailored, weatherproof clothing, load-bearing architecture made from animal remains, long-term food preservation, cooperative social structures built specifically around resource sharing and risk reduction. That's not luck. That's not instinct alone. That's applied knowledge, tested and passed down. And it had to be passed down precisely because there was no room for trial and error when the temperature dropped to 40 below. A child who grew up watching how the fire was tended, how the hides were cut, how the shelter was built, absorbed decades of accumulated knowledge before they were old enough to need it themselves. Elders weren't just respected, they were repositories of survival information that literally kept the group alive. Lose that knowledge, lose an elder before it's passed on, and the next winter could be the one that wipes out the group. Compare that to what a modern person could actually do in the same situation. Drop most people into an Ice Age winter with the clothes on their back and nothing else, and they wouldn't last a week. No fire starting skill, no idea how to cure a hide, no concept of which snow to melt for water and which to avoid. We've outsourced almost all of that knowledge to systems and supply chains that didn't exist for the vast majority of human history. Your ancestors carried that entire survival toolkit in their heads, refined over tens of thousands of years, because there was no alternative. None of this was luck. It was inherited knowledge passed down through generations who had already tested what worked and what got people killed. The fire that never went out, the hide that fit the body, the bones that formed a wall against the wind, the pit dug into frozen ground to save a family from starving in February. Every Ice Age you're picturing right now, someone survived it using exactly this. Someone made the decision to keep watching the fire instead of sleeping. Someone chose to stay close to the group instead of striking out alone, and that someone is the reason you exist.